I'll keep going. And it's time for me to do the talk this week. So I know Neil's talking about a famous guide last week, but it was interesting today. I've had lying on my desk here for a while, and a piece of work about Stainton Moses, and it's interesting because his work was very different to Silver Birch. Stainton Moses was an automatic writer. Stainton Moses was a Methodist minister who actually had a parish, and he had to give up being he gave up being a Methodist minister because of, I think he had TB for a time. I think he actually managed to get over it. And he was asked he went to work for the private chaplain for a wealthy lady, and he was asked to investigate spiritualism. And he started to investigate spiritualism, and he actually developed into being an automatic writing medium. He also did slate writing. And he wrote 2 books, Spirit Teachings and Spirit Identity, which are sometimes regarded as the spiritualist Bible. And it's interesting, they're a group of conversations he had with his guide. So he would pose questions, and then his guides would write the answers to the questions. And it's interesting. It's a very different style of work to Silver Birch, which is very much about life. This is about a whole range of things that you might expect might come from somebody from a Methodist minister's background, about the nature of what God is and God. And there's a whole series of chapters and answers about it, like which are very interesting to read. And something caught my eye today because it's rather tuned in with some work I did before we started these. I sat down, one of our first virtual meetings, I sat down and I did a semi-automatic, I didn't go into trance, I just allowed my guide to try and speak through me, my guide Tao Seng. And the nature of what he was conferring was actually much more in tune with what came out from the guide called Imperator, who was Stainton Moses' guide. And it's about the nature of God and how we only perceive of God within the nature of our ability to perceive and what we know. So as we've developed, so what we think of God and what we feel of God is what we get, if you like. We create a God that's in our looks like us, acts like us, if you like. In the early days, it even asked people to kill their children to bring God's favour on the Israelites. So, that's the nature of the God we create. And they were trying to explain that that's really not what God is. And in some respects, that's a very different message from Silver Birch, but it's a very important message. And they're books that intrigue me because I was thinking about where we think we're going to go after this pandemic, after we've been in lockdown. I hear people saying things will change, and my immediate viewpoint is they didn't change in New Orleans after the floods. They went back fairly soon to being like they were, but with whole chunks of New Orleans ruined. I cannot see mankind or the way we operate changing very much. And that's down to the nature, I think, of us and people, because we often look for miracles or things that will change our world without us doing anything. And the only way we can reflect what we want to happen in the world is by us making a move to create that change. All the information I get is God's not going to make anything happen for us. This world that we live on is a place where we exercise our free will, where we should exercise our personal responsibility, but quite frequently don't. And we can't allow the world to really develop because we have so many different religions, and it becomes very hard to see that the way we're going can be changed. It was interesting reading Stainton Moses. They're saying basically that in there, he's saying very much, there isn't a plan, because the plan doesn't exist for God, because we create and change the plan all the time by the way we move ourselves and our religions move ourselves. So the interreactions of our religions and the differences between religions mean that we're always at odds with each other and are not moving forward. That they were referring to the thing I always realised when I was very young. I got tangled up very young because for whatever reason I developed to be, my father, for instance, was a major in the army. He had two roles which are quite at odds. One was at the Army School of Civil Defence. He taught people who ran councils how to deal with the aftermath of a nuclear attack. So they would set up an area to look like people were lying down with the most horrendous wounds, and people would have to learn how to cope with nuclear attacks and lead suits and all of those lovely things. He actually had a second role, and that was as the chief procurement officer behind the British missile program, which is a totally different side of the thing. So he was trying to help us develop a way to lob this stuff on people, while at the same time teaching people with coping with the consequences. And I was a pacifist, so I didn't like nuclear weapons, so I did the Ban the Bomb March when I was 15 or 16. I think I went up to London on my own and walked 9 miles into Trafalgar Square with the marchers, with the fascists throwing things at us. It was good fun. And I also got heavily involved in being very anti-apartheid. I hated it with a passion. And I had a friend who was the son of a church warden, local church warden, who believed in it. And I would argue violently against it and saying it was wrong, and it's not how the Bible teaches people to believe. That's not what God thinks. That's not what Christ would ever have thought. Because I wasn't a Christian by then. I'd already given up on the church, but I felt it was wrong. And the interesting thing was that the guy I had the argument with was an ex-sufferer of juvenile diabetes. And as a result, he'd lost 3 years at school. So he was actually 19 going through the upper sixth to get his A-levels when I was talking to him, and I would have been in the 4th or 5th year, so I was about 3 years younger than him. And when he qualified with his doctorate of divinity, I was at Hull in college, and I hitchhiked up to Durham for his ordination. And I said to him, "Where are you going?" He said, "Actually," he said, "you're going to laugh." He said, "I'm going to South Africa as an Anglican priest, and I'm going to work against apartheid," which was one of those funny stories. But it's only when you actually look at what we want and how we see society that we're ever going to change it. It's about what we do. And I think of those principles that we have, the 7 principles. You know, we have the fatherhood of God. Well, I believe it is more in terms, I've got both sets of principles here. I've got the American ones. The American first principle is we believe in infinite intelligence. They believe in a God that is neither caring or uncaring. It just is. God is just God in their view. We have the fatherhood of God inspiring some parental involvement with us. And we then have the brotherhood of man, and that's pretty obvious. That means everybody, doesn't matter who you are, what you believe in, what you think, what you feel, what colour you are, what race, what religion. That's a very important point. It's one of the reasons when I ran into spiritualism, I accepted it immediately as having had proof of survival. I was quite happy to accept it. The third one is the continuous existence. The third one is communion with spirits as ministering angels. I've gone back to the original principle, which is because the original principle states that we are actually dealing with spirits. Although they might appear to be angels to us, they are spirits that have had a past life. The next one is the continuous existence of the human soul, which I believe, funnily enough, I always believed in. I always thought it was illogical that we would just die and cease to exist. It seemed illogical there'll be a heaven and a hell too. And then we have personal responsibility, which everybody loves. I love personal responsibility. I try and avoid it as much as possible. And then we have compensation and retribution for all deeds on earth. Now, it's not in spiritualism karma. It is that when you go back to spirit, you actually resolve what you've done in this life. You go back and you deal with those things, you experience what you did in this life. And then we move on to the other one, which is eternal progress for all souls. Now they're logical things, those. They're things that we might expect in all religions. In fact, we actually filter through most of the good things of all religions, and yet we can't seem to move on. And I just wonder how we can express this to the world. Is there a way we can actually share and get people to be involved with us? And I'll just stop there. I think that's all I need to do.
Mm.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is a tough one because
that's a good one.
you know, when you take the fear around when there's things that bother you. Oh, we've got 2 more people joined. When there are things that are bothering you, you really have to rely on those things that you can control, and those things you might be able to change. And part of it is how we relate to people, I think.
Mm.
So if anybody's got any comments on it.